The forest was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the crackle of our campfire and the distant howl of a coyote that made my skin prickle. I'd always thought of the woods as a place to escape, but tonight, with Elias beside me, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us and something was about to break. My best friend's shadow flickered against the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the way he looked at me wasn't the same anymore. We'd driven 6 hours from Seattle to this nowhere patch of Washington forest, chasing a weekend free from the noise of our lives. I was Marcus Tate, 24, a graphic designer with a knack for overthinking, and Elias Navarro was the guy who'd been my anchor since we were kids sneaking beers behind his dad's garage in Tacoma. He was all sharp edges and quiet strength olive skin, a crooked smile that could charm anyone, and eyes that seemed to hold secrets I'd never dared to ask about. We'd planned this camping trip for months, just us. A tent, a cooler of cheap beer, and the kind of freedom you only get when the city's too far to call you back. But tonight, something was off. Elias had been quiet all day, his usual easy laugh replaced by long stretches of staring into the fire. I tossed another stick into the flames, watching sparks spiral into the dusk. "You good, man?" I asked, keeping my tone light, though my gut twisted with unease. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back on his hands, his flannel shirt pulling tight across his shoulders. The firelight carved his face into sharp relief, and for a second, I caught something in his expression, something raw, like he was wrestling with words he couldn't say. "Just thinking," he finally muttered, his voice low, almost swallowed by the crackling logs. "About what?" I pressed, though part of me didn't want to know. We'd always been close, too close. Maybe, for two guys who'd never talked about what that meant. Growing up, we'd shared everything, secrets, dreams, the kind of trust that didn't need words. But lately, I'd noticed the way his gaze lingered, the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me a beer. It was nothing, I told myself. Just Elias being Elias. Except now, alone in the woods, it didn't feel like nothing. He shifted closer, his knee bumping mine, and I froze. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Marcus," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I told you something that changed everything?" My heart thudded, loud enough I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to laugh it off, to crack a joke and keep things easy. But the look in his eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't just a question, it was a confession, waiting to spill. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "What kind of thing?" I asked, though I already knew I wasn't ready for the answer. Elias didn't look away. His hand moved, slow and deliberate, until his fingers grazed my wrist. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent a jolt through me, like I'd been plugged into something electric. My breath caught, and for a moment, the world was just his hand on mine, the fire's heat, and the weight of a truth neither of us had ever spoken. "I don't know how to say this," he said, his voice cracking, "but I've been carrying it for years." His fingers tightened, and I felt the forest close and around us, like it was holding its breath too. "Marcus," a branch snapped in the darkness beyond the fire, sharp and sudden, and we both flinched. My pulse raced as I scanned the trees. The moment shattered. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, half expecting a bear or some other nightmare to come charging out of the shadows. Elias pulled his hand back, the spell broken. "Probably just a deer," he said, but his voice was tight, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. He stood, grabbing the flashlight from our pack. "I'll check it out." "No way, man. We go together," I said, scrambling to my feet. My heart was still pounding, not just from the noise, but from what he'd almost said. Whatever it was, it hung between us like smoke, impossible to ignore. We moved into the trees, the flashlight's beam cutting through the fog. The forest was alive with small sounds, rustling leaves, the skitter of something small but nothing dangerous. Still, the interruption felt like a warning, like the universe wasn't ready for us to cross that line. As we walked, I stole glances at Elias. His jaw set, his eyes scanning the darkness. I wanted to ask him to finish what he'd started, but the words stuck in my throat. We found no thing, no deer, no bear, just the endless stretch of trees. When we got back to the fire, Elias didn't sit as close as before. He poked at the flames with a stick, his face unreadable. Guess it was nothing, he said, but we both knew it wasn't. I wanted to push, to demand he tell me what he'd meant. But something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or the nagging sense that once he said it, we couldn't go back. Instead, I grabbed a beer from the cooler and handed him one, trying to rebuild the ease we'd always had. To surviving the wilderness, I said, forcing a grin. He clinked his chin against mine, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. To surviving, he echoed, and the weight of it settled over us like the fog. That night, as we lay in our tent, the silence between us was louder than the forest. I stared at the canvas ceiling, replaying his touch, his words, the way my heart had betrayed me with its racing beat. Elias was my best friend, the one constant in my life. But now, alone in the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something bigger, something that could either save us or break us apart. The morning sun filtered through the pines, painting the forest floor in patches of gold. But the air between Elias and me was still heavy with last night's unspoken words. I woke to the sound of him unzipping the tent, his silhouette moving against the dawn. He hadn't slept much, I could tell from the shadows under his eyes when he handed me a mug of instant coffee, his fingers brushing mine just long enough to make my pulse jump again. "Sleep okay?" he asked, his voice careful, like he was testing the waters. "Barely," I admitted, sipping the bitter coffee to avoid his gaze. "You?" He shrugged, poking at the fire's embers with a stick. "Kept thinking about that noise last night. Kind of freaked me out." I knew he was lying. It wasn't the forest sounds keeping him up, it was the same thing gnawing at me. But I let it slide, because pushing him now felt like stepping off a cliff. Instead, we packed up camp in silence. The routine of folding the tent and stowing gear a temporary shield against whatever was simmering between us. We'd planned to hike to a nearby lake today, a spot Elias had found on some obscure hiking forum. It's supposed to be unreal, he'd said months ago, his eyes lighting up in that way that always made me agree to his plans, no matter how crazy. Now, as we trekked through the forest, backpacks heavy and boots crunching on pine needles, I wondered if this trip was his way of forcing us into a moment we couldn't avoid. The trail was steep, the air crisp with the scent of moss and damp earth. Elias led the way, his strides confident despite the uneven ground. I watched the back of his head, the way his dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, and tried to ignore the pull on my chest. We'd always been physical wrestling as kids, high-fiving after basketball games, crashing on each other's couches after late nights. But his touch last night had been different, deliberate, and it had cracked something open inside me I wasn't sure I could close again. "Yo, Marcus," he called over his shoulder, pausing to point at a break in the trees. "Check it out." I caught up, my breath catching as I saw the lake. It was a mirror of turquoise, nestled between cliffs and framed by evergreens. So still it looked like glass. The beauty of it hit me hard, but not as hard as the way Elias was looking at me when I turned to him. His eyes were soft, unguarded, and for a second, I thought he might say it's whatever it was he'd stopped himself from saying last night. "Worth the hike, right?" he said instead, his voice lighter but still laced with something heavier. "Yeah," I managed, my throat tight. "Worth it." We dropped our packs and sat on a flat rock by the water's edge, sharing a bag of trail mix and passing a water bottle back and forth. The lake was so quiet it felt like we were the only two people on Earth. I wanted to ask him about last night, to demand he explain why his touch had felt like a confession. But every time I opened my mouth, the words died. Instead, Elias broke the silence. "You ever think about what you'd do if you could start over?" he asked, tossing a pebble into the lake. Ripples spread, breaking the perfect reflection. "Like, new life, new city," I said, trying to keep it casual. Knew everything, he said, his voice low. No expectations. No rules. My stomach twisted. I knew what he meant, or at least I thought I did. Elias had grown up in a family where rules meant everything. His dad's strict Catholic values. His mom's quiet insistence on keeping up appearances. He'd always been the good son, the one who never pushed back. But I'd seen the cracks, how he'd tense up when his dad made snide comments about certain lifestyles. How he'd change the subject when his cousins asked if he was dating anyone. You thinking of running away? I joked, but my heart wasn't in it. He didn't laugh. Maybe, he said, his eyes on the water. But not alone. The words hung there, heavy as the fog that still clung to the trees. I wanted to ask what he meant, who he'd take with him, but my mouth wouldn't move. Instead, I stood, brushing dirt off my jeans. Let's swim, I said, desperate to break the tension. Water looks cold as hell. But why not? Elias grinned, the first real smile I'd seen all morning. You're insane, he said, but he was already kicking off his boots. We stripped down to our boxers, laughing like we were kids again, and dove into the lake. The water was freezing, stealing my breath, but it felt good, like it could wash away the confusion clouding my head. Elias splashed me, and I tackled him, our bodies colliding in the shallow water. For a moment, it was just us, wrestling and laughing, the weight of last night forgotten. But then he grabbed my shoulders, pulling me close, and the laughter stopped. His hands were warm against my cold skin, his face inches from mine. Marcus, he said, his voice barely audible over the lapping water. I need to tell you something. My heart slammed against my ribs. I could feel his breath, see the droplets clinging to his eyelashes. Then say it, I whispered, half challenging, half pleading. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a shout echoed from the trail above. Hey, you guys okay down there? We jerked apart, spinning to see a hickory middle-aged guy with a dog waving from the cliff's edge. Elias let go of me, his face closing off. We're good, he called back, his voice steady but distant. The moment was gone, stolen by a stranger's voice. We climbed out of the water, shivering and silent, and dressed quickly. The hiker moved on, but the interruption left a hollow ache in my chest. Whatever Elias had been about to say, he wasn't saying it now. And as we hiked back to camp, the distance between us felt wider than the lake we'd left behind. Back at camp, the fire was just embers, and the air felt colder than it should for a summer afternoon. Elias busied himself with the cooler, pulling out sandwiches we'd packed, but his movements were mechanical, like he was avoiding me. I sat on a log, picking at the bread, my mind stuck on the lake, his hands on my shoulders. The words he hadn't said. You gonna eat or just stare at it? Elias asked, nodding at my untouched sandwich. His tone was light, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Not hungry, I said, tossing it back into the cooler. What's with you? Man, you've been weird since last night. He froze, a plastic water bottle halfway to his mouth. For a second, I thought he'd brush it off again, but then he set the bottle down and looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing through every wall I'd ever built. You want the truth, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm scared. Of what? I asked, though my heart was already racing with the answer. Of losing you, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. Of saying something that makes you look at me differently. My breath caught. I wanted to tell him he could never lose me, that he was the one person I'd always need. But the words felt too big, too dangerous. Instead, I said, you're not making sense. Elias, just spit it out. He laughed, a bitter sound that didn't suit him. You think it's that easy? You think I can just— He stopped, running a hand through his hair. Forget it. Let's go for a walk. I didn't argue. We left the camp, heading down a narrow trail that wound deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, the light dimmer, and the silence between us was a living thing, pressing against my chest. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. We stopped at a clearing where a fallen tree lay across the path, its roots exposed like raw nerves. Elias leaned against it, his face half-shadowed. "You remember that summer after high school?" he said suddenly. "When we drove to the coast and slept on the beach." "Yeah," I said, smiling despite myself. "We got so sunburned your mom grounded you for a week." He chuckled, but it faded fast. "That was the first time I realized it," he said, "how I felt about you." My heart stopped. I stared at him, the words sinking in like stones. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, his jaw tight. "I'm saying I've been in love with you since we were 17, Marcus. And I've been too damn scared to tell you because I know what it could cost." The world tilted. I gripped the tree for balance, my mind racing to catch up. Elias's best friend, the guy I'd shared every stupid moment of my life with, was in love with me. The touches, the looks, the silence, it all made sense now. And it terrified me. Not because I didn't feel something too, but because I did. And I'd spent years pretending I didn't. "Say something," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please." I started, but my throat closed up. I wanted to tell him I'd felt it too, that his touch last night had lit something inside me I couldn't ignore. But fear clawed at my fear of what it meant, of what we'd lose if we crossed this line. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, hating myself for it. His face fell, and for a moment, I thought he might walk away. But then he stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat of him. "Then don't say anything," he said, and before I could react, his hand was on my face, his thumb brushing my cheek. I froze, caught between wanting to pull away and wanting to lean into him. His eyes searched mine, desperate and hopeful, and then he leaned in, his lips brushing mine so softly I barely registered it at first. But then he kissed me, really kissed me, and the world exploded into light and heat and everything I'd been too scared to name. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, his hair, pulling him closer. It was reckless, terrifying, perfect. The forest faded, the fears faded, and for that moment, it was just us two guys who'd been running from this for too long. But then I heard it again, that same sharp snap in the trees. Closer this time. We broke apart, breathless, eyes wide. "What the hell?" I gasped, scanning the darkness. Elias grabbed my hand, his grip tight. "We need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Now." We ran back toward camp, the forest a blur around us. My heart pounded, not just from the kiss but from the sense that something was watching us, something that didn't belong. When we reached the fire, it was nearly out, and our gear was scattered, torn bags, spilled food, like something had gone through it. "Someone was here," Elias said, his voice shaking as he scanned the mess. "This wasn't an animal." I nodded, my stomach churning. The kiss, the confession, it should have been the only thing that mattered. But now, alone in the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't as alone as we'd thought. The campsite looked like a crime scene, our gear strewn across the dirt like it had been torn apart by something angry. Elias knelt by the cooler, inspecting a ripped bag of chips, his face pale in the dying firelight. "This isn't right," he muttered, his voice tight with something that wasn't just fear, it was guilt, like he thought he'd brought this on us. "Could have been a raccoon," I said, trying to sound convincing. But the claw marks on our tent were too deep, too deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight, sweeping its beam over the trees. Nothing moved, but the forest felt alive, watching us. My heart was still racing from the kiss, from Elias's confession. And now this, whatever this was, felt like the universe punishing us for daring to cross that line. "We should pack up," Elias said, standing and brushing dirt off his jeans. "Get back to the car. Figure this out in the morning." "No way," I said, surprising myself. "We're not letting whatever this is, ruin our trip." I didn't want to admit it, but running now felt like running from him, from what had just happened. I wasn't ready to go back to the real world, where his confession would have to face his family, my doubts, and everything else waiting to tear us apart. He looked at me, his eyes searching. You sure? Yeah, I said, forcing confidence I didn't feel. Let's clean this up. Build the fire bigger. We'll be fine. We worked in silence, salvaging what we could. The tent was still usable, though one corner flapped loose where something had slashed it. Elias piled more wood on the fire, the flames roaring back to life. And I tried to focus on the task, not the memory of his lips on mine. But every time our eyes met, the air crackled with what we weren't saying. As we sat by the fire, I finally broke the silence. What you said earlier, about being in love with me. I swallowed, my voice unsteady. How long have you known? He stared into the flames, his hands clasped tight. Since that night on the beach, he said. You were talking about some girl you liked, and I realized I didn't care about her or anyone else. Just you. He laughed, a small, broken sound. Thought it'd go away. You know, like it was just a phase. But it didn't. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him I'd felt it too, those moments when his laugh made my chest ache, when his casual touches lingered too long in my mind. But I'd buried those feelings, convinced they were wrong, or impossible, or just me reading too much into our friendship. Now, with his words laid bare, I couldn't hide anymore. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I know you, he said, finally looking at me. You're the guy who plans everything, who needs to know how it ends before you start. I didn't want to scare you off. He wasn't wrong. I'd always been the careful one, mapping out my life like a design project, every choice calculated, every risk weighed. But this, with him, wasn't something I could plan. It was messy, terrifying, and I wanted it more than I'd ever admit. Before I could respond, another sound cut through the night, a low, guttural growl that made my blood run cold. Elias grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. That's not a raccoon, he whispered, his eyes wide. We stood back to back, the flashlight shaking in my hand as I scanned the trees. The growl came again, closer, from the direction of the trail. My mind raced. Bear. Cougar. Something worse. But the forest was silent now. Too silent. Like it was holding its breath. We need to get to the car, Elias said, his voice low but firm. Now. I nodded, grabbing our packs. We doused the fire, plunging the camp into darkness, and moved quickly, the flashlight's beam bouncing wildly. The trail was narrow, the trees pressing in, and every snap of a twig made my heart lurch. Elias stayed close, his hand brushing mine as we ran. And despite the fear, his touch grounded me. We were halfway to the car when we saw Ida's figure in the shadows, just off the trail. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too still. I froze. The flashlight locked on it, but it didn't move. Elias, I whispered, my voice shaking. I see it, he said, his hand tightening on mine. Keep moving. Don't look back. We ran, the figure fading into the darkness behind us. My lungs burned, my mind screaming with questions. What was that? Why was it here? But all I could focus on was Elias's hand in mine, pulling me forward, keeping me from falling apart. When we reached the car, we threw our packs inside and locked the doors, our breaths ragged. Elias started the engine, but he didn't drive right away. He looked at me, his face pale but determined. We're okay, he said, more to himself than me. We're okay. But as we pulled onto the dirt road, the forest stretching endless around us, I wasn't so sure. Something had followed us out here, something real. Or maybe just the weight of what we'd started. Either way, I knew we couldn't go back to who we'd been before. The car's headlights sliced through the dark, the dirt road bumpy and narrow as we sped away from the forest. My hands were still shaking, gripping the strap of my backpack like it could anchor me. Elias drove with both hands on the wheel, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds like he expected that thing, whatever it was, to come chasing after us. You saw it, Right? I asked, my voice hoarse. That wasn't just my imagination. I saw it, Elias said, his voice steady but clipped. I don't know what it was, but I saw it. We didn't speak for a while after that. The silence was heavy, filled with the echo of his confession, the kiss, and now this thing that had turned our escape into a nightmare. I wanted to ask him about it, to make sense of the figure in the shadows. But my mind kept circling back to his lips on mine, the way my world had shifted in that moment. It felt like the forest itself was trying to pull us apart, like it knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. We stopped at a gas station an hour later, the neon lights harsh after the forest's darkness. Elias filled the tank while I went inside to grab coffee, my reflection in the glass door looking like a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, haunted. The clerk, an older woman with a bored expression, barely glanced at me as I paid. Outside, Elias was leaning against the car, staring at the stars. You okay? I asked, handing him a coffee. He took it, his fingers brushing mine, and I felt that same jolt from the lake. Not really, he said, his voice soft. You? Same, I admitted. I wanted to say more, to tell him how his kiss had turned everything I thought I knew upside down. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I leaned against the car next to him, our shoulders touching. We can't go back to the city yet, he said after a moment. Not after everything. I nodded, understanding what he meant. Seattle was waiting his family, my job, the world that would judge us before we'd even figured out what us meant. So what do we do? I asked. There's a motel a few miles up the road, he said. We crash there, figure out what's next. The motel was a rundown place called the Pineview, with flickering lights and a clerk who didn't ask questions. Our room was small, with 2 twin beds and a musty smell, but it felt safer than the forest. Elias dropped his bag and sat on one bed, his hands clasped between his knees. I sat across from him, the space between us feeling both too big and too small. About what happened, I started, my heart pounding. The kiss. He looked up, his eyes raw. I'm sorry if I pushed you, he said. I couldn't keep it in anymore. You didn't push me, I said quickly. I kissed you back, Elias. I wanted it. His face softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. So what does that mean? He asked. For us. I didn't have an answer. I'd spent my life avoiding questions like this, keeping my feelings locked away because it was safer that way. But looking at him now, I knew I couldn't keep running. It means I'm scared, I said honestly. But not of you. Of what happens next. He nodded, like he understood exactly what I meant. Me too, he said. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. The words hit me like a punch, and before I could think, I was across the room, kissing him again. This time, it wasn't rushed or desperate, it was slow, deliberate, like we were mapping each other out. His hands found my back, pulling me closer, and for the first time, I let myself feel it all at once. The fear, the hope. We broke apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. We'll figure it out, he whispered. Together. But as we lay on separate beds that night, the motel's thin walls creaking around us, I couldn't shake the image of that figure in the woods. It felt like a warning, like something was still out there, waiting. I didn't know if it was real or just the weight of what we'd started, but it followed me into my dreams, a shadow that wouldn't let go. Morning light crept through the motel's faded curtains, painting stripes across Elias's sleeping form. He looked younger in sleep. The worry lines smoothed away, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't name love. Maybe, or the fear of losing it. I slipped out of bed quietly, needing air, needing space to think. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for our car, the forest looming in the distance like a dark promise. I leaned against the hood, replaying everything as confession. Our kisses, the figure in the woods. It felt like we'd stumbled into something bigger than us. Something that wasn't just about love, but about facing the parts of ourselves we'd buried. when Elias joined me, his hair mussed and his flannel untucked. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside me, close enough that our arms brushed. "You're up early," he said finally, his voice soft. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Too much in my head." He nodded, his eyes on the forest. "We need to talk about what happened out there. Not just us. The other thing." I knew he meant the figure. The torn-up camp. "You think it was real?" I asked, my voice low, like saying it too loud might summon it back. "I don't know," he said, but it didn't feel random. Like it was watching us. A chill ran through me. I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the memory of that shadow too tall, too still felt too vivid. "Maybe we pissed off some forest spirit," I said, trying to joke, but it fell flat. Elias didn't laugh. "Maybe it's not the forest," he said. "Maybe it's us. Like the world's telling us we're not supposed to be this." I turned to him, my chest tightening. "You don't believe that, do you?" He met my gaze, his eyes steady but sad. "I don't know what I believe anymore, Marcus. All I know is I've spent years hiding who I am. And the second I stop, something tries to tear us apart." I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. "Nothing's tearing us apart," I said, more certain than I felt. "Not some shadow in the woods. Not your family. Not anything." He squeezed my hand, but his smile was fragile. "I want to believe that." We checked out of the motel and drove to a diner nearby. A greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like tar. Over pancakes and bacon, we tried to talk about normal things: work, friends, the Seahawks' chances this season, but the conversation kept circling back to us. To what we were now. What we could be. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, pushing my plate away. I've never thought about being with a guy. Not seriously." Elias nodded, like he'd expected this. "I get it. It's a lot. But I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I just need to know if you're in this with me." I looked at him, his face open and vulnerable, and felt a rush of certainty. "I'm in," I said. "I don't know what that looks like, but I'm in." His smile was small but real, and for a moment, the diner's fluorescent lights felt as warm as the campfire had. We paid the bill and headed back to the car, ready to face the drive back to Seattle and whatever came next. But as we pulled onto the highway, I glanced in the side mirror and froze. In the distance, just beyond the tree line, I saw it again, that same figure, standing motionless, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone, but my hands shook as I gripped the seat. "You okay?" Elias asked, glancing over. "Yeah," I lied, my eyes still on the mirror. "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was scared not just of the shadow, but of what it represented. The world wasn't going to make this easy for us. And as we drove, the city growing closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. Seattle's skyline loomed ahead, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the wild chaos of the forest. Elias drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts. We'd left the woods behind, but the shadow of that figure and the truth we'd uncovered followed us like a ghost. Back at my apartment, we dropped our bags and collapsed on the couch, the city's hum filtering through the open window. I wanted to pretend we could slip back into our old rhythm, but the air between us was different now, charged with possibility and risk. Elias sat close, his knee brushing mine, and I felt that same pull from the lake, the campfire, the motel. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what now?" He looked at me, his eyes soft but resolute. "Now we figure out how to be us," he said. "No more hiding." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. Seattle wasn't the forest here. There were people, expectations, consequences. My family wasn't like Elias's. They were progressive, open-minded, but I'd never told them I might be, what? Bi? Gay? I didn't even know the words yet. And Elias's family is Dad's disapproval. His mom's quiet judgment would make this a battle. I'm not saying it'll be easy, he said, reading my mind. But I'm done pretending. I want you. Marcus. All of you. His words hit me hard, stripping away the last of my defenses. I leaned in, kissing him. And this time there was no fear. No interruption, just us. Real and raw. When we pulled back, I felt lighter. Like I'd finally let go of something I'd been carrying too long. The next few weeks were a blur of small, brave steps. We told our friends first, the ones we knew would have our backs. My buddy Sam just grinned and said, "About time." Man. Elias's sister, Anna, hugged him so tight I thought she'd break him, whispering, "I always knew." But his parents were another story. His dad didn't speak to him for a week, and his mom sent long texts about praying for clarity. It hurt him. I could see it. But he didn't back down. We started building something real, dates at hole-in-the-wall bars. Late nights talking about everything and nothing. Moments when I'd catch him looking at me and feel my heart stutter. But the shadow from the woods never fully left. I'd see it sometimes. In a reflection. At the edge of my vision. Always gone when I looked closer. I didn't tell Elias. I didn't want to scare him, but I wondered if it was my own fear manifesting. A reminder of the world's judgment waiting to pounce. One night, a month later, we were walking home from a movie, hand in hand, when a group of guys shouted slurs from across the street. Elias tensed, his grip tightening, but he didn't let go. "Ignore them," he said, his voice steady. And we did. We kept walking, heads high, refusing to let their hate dim what we'd found. That night, as we lay in bed, his head on my chest, I realized something. The shadow wasn't just fear, it was a challenge. A test of whether we'd fight for this. And we would. Not just for us, but for everyone who'd ever felt too scared to love who they loved. "We're gonna be okay," I whispered, my lips against his hair. "Yeah," he said, his voice warm with certainty. "We are." The forest had changed us, forced us to face truths we'd buried. It had been terrifying, exhilarating, and worth every second. We were alone in the woods once, but now we were together in the world, and that was enough.